people like getting out to store and seeing what's going on in the real world. So, probably I think you share that advice of get out into store with as many different people as you can, and just have your ears open.
What I learned was that you can't do it in splendid isolation. You get to work with incredible individuals, all of whom you can learn from. But the best work is done when you're aligned.
Yeah.
When you are singing from the same hymn sheet and you are definitely pushing in the same direction.
I always admired about the Cereal Partners business when I was in the broader Nestle organisation was, you guys were genuinely customer obsessed and shopper obsessed. And I think that's one of the things that Cereal Partners did really well.
People rush for new. Sometimes if you're in a bigger organisation, I would encourage those to look back in on what they may have done in the past, what they've got, what flavours they've got, what products they've got. There is a whole raft of brilliant IP sat around UK brands that I think is sometimes overlooked. And I have a real passion for revival as a space. To me, listening, realising that the best answers come from anywhere as well. I mean, they basically fell off their sort of seats during their lunch break at 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Going,
what's he doing here?
No one's ever asked us.
But you being there at 1 o'clock in the morning,
Exactly.
probably gave them permission to share some of those opportunities, ideas that no one else was listening to at the time. We're here today with Phil Toms from See Around Corners. We talk about sales and marketing collaboration in strategy, collaboration in execution, and ultimately how everyone can treat every penny as if it were their own. Welcome to the podcast. So Phil, thank you ever so much for joining us here in Peterborough today. It's good to see you. I suppose we should really start with, tell us about Phil, career today, how we come to be sat talking today.
The bright lights of Peterborough.
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, thank you. How do we come to be sat talking here today? I mean, my background, and as you know, is in FMCG. I've been blessed to be in FMCG for the best part of quite a number of years, should we admit? We won't say too many. But I was thinking about, before this conversation, what actually got me to be where I am today. And I go right back to when I was a young kid, and my granddad was a really kind of key figure in my life and quite the entrepreneur. And interestingly, he was in the world of retail. I used to be a buyer for Co-op in the Midlands back in the day, and quit that. And I was quite a shy kid. And I tell you all this because we got to a place where he realised, having sold his hotel business in Bournemouth, that he wanted to carry on doing some things. And he set up a market stall, and he took the shy kid that was Phil and took him out, and we were selling knitwear of all things. And it made me realise that I loved the transaction part. I loved the buying and selling, and then I got to this place where I was like, actually, do you know what? I think marketing's what I really love. There was, and I think there still is, a brilliant scheme called Young Enterprise, and I got involved in that. And all of a sudden, I found this space for me. I decided that marketing was the thing that I wanted to do. And back in the day, there were not a million marketing degrees around, but realised from a basis of differentiation that actually I could differentiate myself by getting myself a marketing degree early on. So I learned quite early on that marketing was the space I wanted to be, but I also learned quite a sanguine lesson that when I was doing my degree, I did my third year and I did a placement in the world of IT. And by about day 3, I wanted to gouge my own eyes out. I'd had enough.
How did you go from marketing degree to IT placement?
Well, it was an IT placement, but doing a marketing degree.
Just couldn't get excited about the subject.
Yeah, well, no, it was in an IT company doing a marketing placement. Yeah. And it was great. But I think what I realised was that if you're doing something in the world of marketing, you must love it. And I told myself from about day 3 onwards that when I graduated, for me, it had to be something I loved, and food and drink was the space that I dearly loved. And I quickly identified that I wanted to be in, hence how I landed in FMCG back in the day.
So I've learned something new. You once worked in knitwear. I didn't know that.
I worked in knitwear, worked on market stalls. But when you're a shy lad, as I said, my granddad was quite the role model for me. And it was brilliant to be able to understand that, there was a big wide world out there that could be explored. And he took me under his wing and I learned plenty.
Brilliant. And how long was he in kind of trading in that way?
Oh, in a long time. He had about a 30-year career in trading for Co-op.
Brilliant.
And was a senior buyer and moved into having his own hotel on the West Cliff in Bournemouth. He was very opportunistic. He was always very good at seeing those spaces to play in.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So IT marketing was not for you.
Not for me.
What happened beyond that? Talk to me about how the career unfolded.
So for me, that was a big moment to realise that if you do something, you have to have great passion for it. And so upon graduation, actually, there were a couple of brilliant opportunities, but the one that really stood out for me was what appeared on paper to be the most difficult thing, which was to go and work for British Meat post BSE. Post BSE, in a world where the news was changing day in, day out, and working for some incredible people. A non-commercial organisation, it was a sort of a government body, but it gave me great experience about learning the core discipline of marketing. I worked for some incredible people, including the amazingly named Chris Lamb, who was my boss. There are honestly lots of gags about people with meat-based names that worked for the meat industry at that time, but I'll leave it at Chris. Chris was my boss. And again, someone who saw potential in me and the opportunity to really grow in the food and drink space. And I spent a number of years there and was the brand manager for British Beef, of all things, in sort of an era where it was
the hottest of
volatile,
topics.
The hottest of topics.
Yeah.
But I chose to take that path, not because it was the easiest, but because I could learn the most.
Absolutely. So talk to me about what was so different about working in that environment, a government organisation, versus your experience of working with global brands.
Yeah, I think, it was my first ever sort of, dare I say it, sort of proper job. And I think the thing that struck me quite early on was, in that particular instance, the key stakeholders were levy payers, and they were farmers. So you had an audience for whom they were funding the really interesting work that the organisation was doing, and you were beholden to them in terms of explaining how the money was spent and why you were doing it. And as a young marketeer, I mean, going out and facing audiences in the way that I was expected to was a really good development curve. I learned a lot about how to present, how to share, how to sell the story of why we were doing things. And to some degree, marketing that era was a tiny bit simpler. There wasn't the fragmentation of media. We were fortunate enough to have budgets that allowed us to buy big audiences. We were working with incredible agencies. But what I found at the time was how to deliver effective marketing and how the core discipline was so important. And actually, it's some of those things that I hold dear to right up until today. Some of the things I've learned are still the best practice that I would hold. And I was then sort of so lucky to go and work for an incredible organisation, the quite brilliant Cereal Partners, which is a joint venture between Nestlé, a world that I know knew well, and General Mills. But the lovely thing about Cereal Partners, Ant, was it was owned by the parents, as it were, but had its own sort of personality.
Yeah.
And we were very lucky to be able to lean on incredible resources globally. So we had the infrastructure that came from each of the partners. Because I was in the marketing space, was very close to what General Mills delivered in terms of brand building theory. So building upon that work that I'd done in my early career, I was able to put into practice something that was really meaningful. And the bit that probably for me that excited me most was I moved from being something where it was hard to measure impact to owning that P&L.
Yeah.
To getting to a place where the P&L ownership sat with you, the marketeer, and you had to work really closely with category, with sales, with ops in a UK-based manufacturing environment, which has always been wonderful. I've always loved that, when you're working in a place where you can see the cause and effect on the trucks that are going in and out of sites, working with some incredible individuals, again, who were kind to give me opportunities, but having to follow the really good discipline that was expected you to deliver against to build brands. And I will always look back on my time at Cereal Partners and the opportunity it gave me on such iconic brands. My first brand I worked on was Cheerios. I worked on shredded wheat, and really, really proud to work on Shreddies. And during an era where we sort of reinvented Shreddies, and I think one of the highlights for me, a high watermark certainly, is that piece of work around Knitted by Nanas, which a lot of people know and recognise.
And I'm smiling because we've talked about it before. And
exactly.
I love all the stories behind that.
Yeah,
it's great.
there's some great stories. But I think what you realise in that situation is you're not number one. And at that time, Kellogg's were number one in the market. But we were an exceptional organisation that was growing fast, delivering back to the partners in terms of financial delivery. But what we were also doing was working in conjunction with the retailers in a way that I learned a lot as well. And there were some incredible people that I still see and I still catch up with, who I consider mentors, people who in those early years as Cereal Partners took me under their wing and gave me the opportunity to grow.
Yeah. I think one of the things we've talked about a lot, and one of the reasons we're working more closely together now, is that thing around a marketeer who respects the role that the customer plays and the retailer plays on the journey, and therefore walking into that conversation, joined up and hand in glove with the sales team to make sure that you're all pulling in the same direction. And being brutally honest, in my career, I've had to be quite divisive about marketeers that I can bring in to meet with a customer and marketeers that I can't. And I think whilst we never did it together, we've got lots of mutual acquaintances that said, if that's where you're going to work and take the Celex business, you should really think about how you might want to collaborate with Phil. So there's a huge compliment paid by some of those mentors that you're sort of alluding to.
No, that's very kind. I mean, I think that's right. I think I'm very lucky in that to some degree my marketing career started in a somewhat pure environment because I didn't own that P&L. But I yearned for it. And I think as soon as I got that opportunity within Cereal Partners, what I learned was that you can't do it in splendid isolation. You get to work with incredible individuals, all of whom you can learn from. But the best work is done when you're aligned, when you are singing from the same hymn sheet and you are definitely pushing in the same direction. And I certainly reflect on those principles as something that I've taken into me in more senior roles in sort of later life. I think there's some incredible examples of how you can pull together. And when marketing and sales don't function well together, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm a huge and very passionate believer in the world that you have as a marketeer to operate at the commercial end. And sadly, not all marketeers do. And, I suspect, we've both encountered people for whom, those customer meetings are something they shy away from, whereas actually I've reveled in that opportunity.
I've worked with lots of salespeople who shy away from them as well. But
yeah. But no, I think it's something that again I realise upon reflection how lucky I was to be in part of a organisation with great people to learn from all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that stakeholder management, working with British Meat, really explaining how you were investing that money and what it was driving, really helped you move into a bigger organisation like Cereal Partners in terms of stakeholder management.
Yeah.
But I suppose the combination of those two roles, where you went from there, really helped you to genuinely treat the money as if it were your own and be very kind of put a lot of scrutiny on how you're investing money. So I'm keen to talk about where the career went from there, because I think that's really interesting.
I think that's right. I mean, in some respects, it's almost easy to spend big organisations' money because the budgets are plentiful. Not without scrutiny, and certainly it wasn't frivolous at Cereal Partners. It was very well managed spend. We did marketing effectiveness spend evaluation probably that was ahead of the market curve by some stretch, and I learned a lot about that there. But then I moved on, and my mates were pleased with my next move. I sort of moved out of the world of cereal into the world of beer. So you can imagine that my friends were looking forward to the trappings of being a marketing director in the world of beer.
They could see your logic.
Yeah, I mean, they were all very pleased. But I think it was a really interesting move for me. I joined the biggest privately owned brewery in the UK. We had some really interesting brands of our own. We also had some incredible brands under license. And I was fortunate to work on Australia Dam when Australia Dam was sort of going gung-ho, and it continues to do well. In fact, it remains one of my favourite beers and actually one of my favourite brands, the consistency of marketing that came out of the Grupo Dam business. But I was also fortunate to do some incredible innovation, but have my own show, as it were, because I was now taking on a family business, working really closely with different stakeholders. So when it's the family's name above the door, you have to really be sort of really careful, I think, with money spent. So again, the principles that I'd learned, I think, in the world of Cereal Partners allowed me to come to my role in Charles Wells as was, and sort of see, albeit smaller budgets, but budgets that could be really impactful, and get them to a place whereby we were able to drive market rate growth that was outperforming the market, outperforming the category. We had a portfolio that the sales team wanted to sell. But when I first joined, it was quite an interesting dynamic. What I found was that the sales team there were probably missing plans. And so I would find myself in meetings quite early on where I was talking about sort of different challenges the brand faced, and lots of people were trying to execute their way into the answer. I'm like, hang on, what's the strategy here? And coming out of the blue chip environment, I've come out of, effectively 3 businesses, General Mills, Nestle and Cereal Partners, gave me the opportunity to say, right, the right thing to do here is to build up a body of evidence, get inside that insight. Insight for me has always been that North Star that I really hang my hat on. And certainly the conversations that I had in the early days where we weren't talking enough about insight and I insisted upon it and structured the team accordingly meant that the work that we subsequently did in the world of Charles Wells allowed us to become real players in the marketplace, because we were talking in a way that maybe not every brewery was. We were bringing insight, we were bringing joined up thinking, and we switched the dynamic from being what the sales team were sort of scrabbling around for to a position whereby it was sort of insight-led, thought-led plans. And we began to really, really make impact. So for me, that was a really nice cause and effect of going in, seeing the challenge, working on a brilliant portfolio, but being able to influence it for good.
No, that's really interesting. A lot of the conversations that I've certainly had in the last 6 or 8 weeks have been around organisations that are just getting to that level of maturity where, whether it's on-trade customers or off-trade customers, are expecting a bit more from them in terms of insight, are expecting them to have a perspective on where the categories are going. And it's almost that adolescence into adulthood that some of the businesses are struggling with. Yeah. So what would your advice be to those organisations maybe that are in rapid growth, are suddenly on the radar of customers and the expectation grows? What would your advice be for them?
I think it always has to come back to evidence. For me, it's always about evidence. And it doesn't matter whether you're a global blue chip or you're a fast-moving challenger. Actually, in many ways, technology has enabled evidence to be gathered much quicker than it might have done in the glacial speed in the past. So for me, and I think the thing that I really am excited about for those guys is, yes, you can get the insight, but you can translate it in an agile way into action much more quickly.
Yeah.
So much of big blue chips, wonderful though they can be, is they can get lost in their own processes. They can be quite slow moving. And I think if you're a challenger brand and you're moving in a way that sort of the market is demanding more of you, you can show agility in a way that I think those blue chip guys can't. Yeah. So in many ways, I think some of the most exciting brands in the UK are often those brands that are in sort of the upper small, medium-sized space, but have got growth velocity that is incredible.
Yeah. I think one of the myths that some of the really successful, really admired founders and startups of the myth that they've dispelled is insight's expensive, research is expensive. Yeah. I think technology is absolutely leveling that playing field in terms of the data that's available, the insight that's available, the way that you can test a concept in 24 hours using a community and get insight back. I think that's really, it's a real thorn in the side of some of the bigger manufacturers where that was always there. The benefit they had of the scale was that if research and insight was expensive, at least they had the budgets to do it. But I think the playing field, is leveling.
100% right. I think it is. And I think that's where technology is for good, I think. And actually, I think I also have a view, and again, it was born out of experience. And I took this on my journey that you can be really agile and get the conversation in the ear of the big guys in a way that's quite unexpected. I look at brands that are doing things the right way, that are clearly insight-led, even if they are small, emerging, medium-sized brands. And I think huge kudos to them, because they're the ones the retailers probably want to be speaking to, because they can see in a very competitive world where they can bring good to their category and ultimately, of course, their own shoppers.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a massive sample of people. It doesn't have to all be on an Excel spreadsheet. It can genuinely exist, spending time in store, spending time with your target consumer. I think that's one thing I always admired about the Cereal Partners business when I was in the broader Nestle organisation was, you guys were genuinely customer obsessed and shopper obsessed. And I think that's one of the things that Cereal Partners did really well.
I'll give you an example from then, actually. We did a really excellent piece of work around category visioning. It became the glue that hung everything together, I think, for the marketing sales category team. And I remember we did a piece of work where we'd been evaluating all of the different fixtures for the different retailers. And there was I forget his name, but a really brilliant buyer who was buying cereals for Asda. And we'd come to the conclusion that I think their fixture was probably lagging behind their competitive set at the time. And I think the easiest thing to have done would have been showed him some slides of what we thought, and actually we approached it differently. And you're right, we were shopper obsessed, and what we did was we went and interviewed a whole raft of Asda shoppers and got them to talk about their category, the cereal category at the time. And what came back was validating our hypothesis that there was in fact some opportunities for growth for Asda with their category. And we took the buyer and we had a session with him, and it was very conversational. And I think that's a really interesting way to do it. And we showed him these sound bites, these vox pops, and he was blown away. And he said, the reason this works for me is it's not you telling me it, it's my own shoppers
showing me. Yeah.
And so I think that for me is one of those key things that you don't have to spend lots of money. You can spend time and energy getting and talking to the people who can really give you the answer. And it's not just you, the marketeer, or you, the salesperson, or you, the wider business. Actually, it's their shoppers. And you're right, we were obsessed. And I think that's what I always insist on whenever I'm working with any organization, big or small, is what do we know? What can we find out? How quickly can we meaningfully create insight that can be shared with partners?
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. One of the former Nestle Group sales directors, who shall remain nameless, used to often use a phrase with me of "do not turn up and chuck up," meaning don't show them everything you know on a slide as if it's a foregone conclusion. Help take them on the journey. And I think that's storytelling, creating an experience is critical. And I don't think it needs to be expensive. As long as you've done the thinking, you can do it it doesn't have to have all the theatre.
Yeah,
behind it.
You're absolutely right. I have delivered thinking in different ways over the years, and we used to have access when I was at Cereal Partners to the incredible resources that were at York, and that was a big piece that we could go and dress, and we could take people to visit. And the thing I loved about it as a marketeer, I think marketeers transmit too much. I think they use PowerPoint as a crutch. I have a passionate hatred of it as a tool. I just think it doesn't work for me. It's just like, but what we did was we got people to this place where we were able to almost create an exhibition. And what happened was transmission stopped and conversation started. And that's the bit for me that I think is a really important piece for any organization, is you want conversation with your partners, because ultimately you've got a shared goal. And when I was working in the world of beer, we had a 1963 Routemaster bus that was branded, and we drove that down. I didn't drive it, so I drove it down. I don't have a driving license for a bus. Drove it down, and we parked it up in what was Chestnut Car Park back in the day, and we took the beer buyer and the category director. And upstairs we had tables, and on every table was our plans for the next year.
Fantastic.
And I think that's the point, is you have to become a bit unexpected. And I won't repeat the quote by the beer bar at the time, but to all intents and purposes, she said, "You're not the biggest," she said, "but you're certainly the most memorable." And that's what ultimately comes back to being at the crux, I think, of good marketing, is that much as we all care, deeply about what we're doing, consumers, shoppers, or shoppers, consumers don't all the time. It's a small part of what they're thinking about. So, if I boil down what good marketing does, Ant, it gets noticed and it persuades people to do something. And to all intents and purposes, when you're talking to the retailers, you need to do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Charles Wells was, clearly an exciting, interesting experience.
Yep.
What came next?
What came next was a catalyst for change caused by some family requirements. So although there were lots of opportunities to carry on there, I decided to go and pursue my own venture. Decided to do two things then, right? So I did my own consulting business, which was great. I worked with some incredible brands and businesses, of which I can talk about any that are relevant. But I also, having spent Nestle's money, decided I should spend some of my own money, and created a new brand that was a food startup back in the world of cereal, and found myself in the bowels of a retailer in London. Pitching one afternoon to the cereals buyer. I didn't know he was a new person in post from the time I'd been away in beer, and the story goes something like this: that I didn't again want to take any PowerPoint, so the pitch was on the back of the packaging that we wanted to use, and the brand story was the category story was on the back. The brand story, the ingredients were the people. It was sort of the first execution of what the new brand might look like. And I put it down and I said, I brought no PowerPoint. And he went, thank God for that. He said, this is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I've seen PowerPoint all day. And I said, I've just got this. And I spun round the tube and showed him the brand and showed him what was being proposed. And he went, it's great. He said, but I'll stop you there. I went, really? He said, yeah. He said, yeah, I'll take it. And after about sort of a 20-minute conversation, I walked out of Sainsbury's with a national listing for this startup. And you think, oh my God, oh my God, I thought he was going to give us a 40-store listing trial or whatever. So that was a really fascinating period to have my own brand. I was doing it in conjunction with different people, but it was my own startup. And I think you really learn the lessons of every pound is a prisoner.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, it's somewhat easier to spend other people's money when it's your own money. It needs to be really worked super hard. And so I was thrilled and delighted to launch my own product. It's part of the story. It won awards. It got lots of opportunities for further distribution. It was in Sainsbury's stores for the best part of 18 months, 2 years. But it got to a point where we didn't want to overexpose ourselves to it. And so actually we took the, I guess, quite pragmatic decision to be proud we'd done it, but stop it before it became a train we couldn't stop.
Yeah.
But it gives me incredible insight into the founder world, having done that, because I think when you are living your own brand and you're living it on shelf and you're learning the journey that others are going through, you find yourself in a position that's quite unique.
Yeah. It takes the treating it as if it's your own money to an entirely new level.
It does. So actually for me, as I was consulting and as I reflected on my journey to that point, I really found myself in a good position in terms of understanding. So yeah, thrilled to launch this incredible range. It was a range of mueslis and granolas. It was quite groundbreaking.
And what was the brand name?
It was called Sown Grown.
That's right, I remember
Sown Grown, and they were in resealable tubes. And the consumer insight, which is a consumer insight that's still valid today, was that people were very frustrated that cereal would go stale. So actually it was a locked-in freshness proposition. It was a tube that you could lock in the freshness, and it looked great, looked distinctive. Commercially, it sort of really made sense. But of course, cereal is a big competitive world to be in. And so, challenging in terms of a space to operate in. But certainly something that I'm thrilled to be able to say I did. I probably never slept as badly as when I did during that particular period. But it's an incredible part of the story. So yeah, it was around for a couple of years and sort of made me, I think, the even more rounded commercial marketeer that I am today. Because when you find yourself in a position where you already were, getting inside the tube, as it were, with the ingredient costings, making sure it was the best possible experience, the best possible delivery. It was definitely of a almost perhaps a bit before its time, but it was a fantastic thing to be able to share that I did.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you've done the big global multinational, you've done the highly successful UK organisation, and you've done the startup and had the sleepless nights, I think that just puts you in a great position to help people in all three of those walks of life.
No, that's very kind. No, I think it does. I think it gives you a really sort of gives clarity because you're having to think really differently in all of those different spaces. And I was fortunate enough, as I said, to be working with some incredible businesses independently from a consulting standpoint as well. So, I learned some new categories for me. I guess what I have realised over the years is I've covered off most major food groups. So I'm now I'm lucky enough to have worked in different spaces, and that really excites you when I go back to the guy who did the IT placement and realised probably it wasn't for him, but realised quite quickly food and drink was. And that's why I found great joy in working in this space wherever I've been over the last sort of years that I've been in FMCG.
Yeah, it's interesting because having worked equally on lots and lots of different categories, I've enjoyed dimensions of certain ones. I probably enjoyed, maybe I've had a bit more brand strength. I probably enjoyed than a bit less brand strength. I have to be honest. But the one thing that's consistent is I love the food and drink industry. I love the people in the food and drink industry. I love the fact that the UK is seen as one of the beacons of the world because of the retailer concentration, because of the data and insight that's available. So I could never see me going into IT or going into another industry. But it's not without its challenges as an industry.
It's not, and I think it's got even more challenging. I mean, I think I was consulting during COVID, and at the back end of COVID, there was a situation where I think it was just challenging for everyone. Consultancy wasn't something that I think. So I found myself being approached to join a category that I love dearly, that I drink plenty of, and that's tea. And got an opportunity to work with a former colleague, a brilliant guy who I'd worked with at Cereal Partners, who said, we've got this portfolio of tea brands, we're doing okay, but we want to do better. We've got a really strong private label business. And of course, I'd learned sort of private label in other spaces from earlier in my career. But he said the branded business needs some love and attention. So for me, at the back end of COVID, actually, to join an organisation where I could go and affect change in the world of tea, where, as I say, I'm very active in my tea consumption. The kettle is on.
There's worse things to be active in the consumption
Exactly,
market.
yeah. It is, and I love being part of that sector. Very collegiate sector. Some incredible brands in that sector. I mean, I was working on challenger brands, and I got to, find myself in a space where I was butting up against some incredible brands. Yorkshire Tea for me is a brand that's
a great story.
Incredible story, incredible products. Brilliant marketing, consistency, all the things that I think good brands do. And I was working in a challenger space, but I really reveled in the challenge it gave to me, which was to outperform the market. And we outperformed the market with all of our portfolio, because we could use some of that big business discipline that I'd learned earlier on, with harmonizing some of the agility that came with startups and being a bit scrappy. And that's great fun. And we got to a place where, because of our private label capability, we were giving recommendations on category to some big UK retailers and thinking to them. And again, PowerPoint was banned. It was very exhibition led, and the work that we were doing. And although I was working on brands, I was leading on the sort of the total thinking. It gave me the chance to spend time looking into the eyes of some very able people in big retailers who are looking for where the next trends are going. And I think that's the bit that excites me about marketing. You have trends that you are able to ride. And it's fair to say that I think tea as a broad category is challenged, but there's some amazing stuff happening within tea.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's some incredible innovation, some really interesting work driven by out of home. And I think that experience of working in a very beloved category where everyone has a point of view. We were talking before we started about this lovely stat that I was really pleased to be part of an organisation called the UK Tea and Infusions Association. It was an industry body, and I got to sit on that. And they did a piece of work where they talked about 80% of Brits think the best cup of tea is made by themselves.
Of course it is.
Because it's such a personal thing. And yet the flip is, if you look in the world of coffee, actually, probably 80% of people think their local barista or their favourite coffee shop makes their best coffee.
You cannot get a good cup of tea in a coffee shop.
You can't. And for reasons that probably needs its own podcast, I won't go near today. But I think the world of tea is really a fascinating one, because it is it's something that is part of the UK persona. It is people have a big point of view on. And so it required some different thinking, and that was a real pleasure. So I spent the best part of 3 or 4 years working on a tea portfolio that allowed us to outperform the market, think differently, bring some innovation, but bring all the good things I'd learned early in my career: category thinking, incrementality, which I think is key. We've not touched on it yet.
No, absolutely.
But I think incrementality is a watchword that I think good marketeers really understand. And we performed in market in the way that we deserved with the strategy and activation we put in place.
Absolutely. And I think the two words that you and I probably talk about most outside of talking socially is probably about incrementality.
Yeah.
And it's also that sentiment of treating every penny as if it's your own, whether you call it zero-based budgeting, as if you own it. You and I have talked about other phrases from other organisations. But actually, I think we both agree that one of the biggest opportunities out there is that ability to really think about the money as if it were your own, not just in terms of driving the best deal from an agency, the best deal from a gondola end promotion, but actually watching the way the value is tracked between innovation to marketing to category to customer development to retail execution. I think we've both got lots of examples of where value is lost between the functions that I think if you haven't worked across them, you may sense that they're there, but maybe haven't seen them in reality. And I think we're in a market that is so challenged right now that's a big opportunity for a lot of organisations.
I think it is. I think every pound is really challenged, and I think good businesses know how to deploy those pounds. But I also think that there are opportunities to think differently, and that's the thing that's quite exciting. I mean, I think for me, touching on that word of incrementality, actually, it should be at the heart of all discussion. And I was first kind of really brought into the incrementality loop when I was in Cereal Partners, and it's been something that I've always, because you have to think about the people that you're talking to. I mean, the way I always boil it down from a very simplistic perspective is that retailers sell space, and of course they want that space to deliver what they want for their customers, but obviously they've got their own expectations around margin delivery from every square foot. And you've got to think about why you deserve the space and what you are bringing both from a category perspective and what you are bringing from a shopper perspective. Obviously, the end user piece is key. And I think incrementality is such an important and sometimes overlooked word. There's not enough talk of it in marketing, in my experience. And I think it's that language that can really make a big difference for good suppliers into retail, because they are talking the language the retailers want to hear. And it's not incrementality for incrementality's sake. It's about finding the right ideas that have got scalability, they've got growth, they've got relevance. And it's quite interesting watching how retailers are deploying space across multiple categories, because they are clearly thinking about their own shopper needs, in an obsessive way, and rightly so. So I think there's a lot going on at the moment, and with pressure on the P&L, every pound spent wisely is a pound spent is a pound spent in a way that is going to help mutual growth.
Yeah.
Spent poorly, it's not going to benefit anyone.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is the way different retailers are backing different categories.
Yeah.
And I actually think that is more pronounced now than ever before. So if I think about, Sainsbury's and what I'm seeing Sainsbury's really champion versus maybe what Tesco are championing. Now, they're quite ubiquitous in terms of the shoppers they appeal to because their geographic spread and the market share, but they are definitely making different choices. And I would just love to be a fly on the wall in terms of some of those conversations about category roles and what it is that Sainsbury's are thinking and looking at versus Tesco versus maybe an Asda. Because I do think different people are reading the tea leaves, pardon the pun, very, very differently.
Yeah, they are. And they've got to find their own point of difference, haven't they? I mean, that's the reality of the world that we operate in. And the world's moving fast. I mean, there's a lot going on with regard to medication. GLP-1 is changing the landscape around food and drink, and it's moving very fast.
Some scary consumption figures.
There absolutely are. And you see certain retailers, I think, really stepping into the opportunity. I think been hugely impressed by what M&S have been doing in terms of some of the things they've been doing.
Yeah. I think Morrison's as well.
I think Morrison's have done a good job as well. And I think those, you have to move. We used to have a phrase in Cereal Partners, fish where the fishes are. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is going down that route, but I was fortunate enough to take myself off to Expo West in the States earlier in the year, which for me is almost a personal development piece where I go and find out what's going on in the States and around food and drink. And of course, it's a different set of regulations over there, but you can also see where the market is moving. And GLP-1 is further down the line than it is here in the UK, but you can see what's happening. But it's also interesting to see what's going on with nutrient claims. And of course, you can claim more over there, but also, and everything is protein. It's protein, which we're seeing quite
a few more grams of protein versus somebody else. Yeah.
But the piece that's quite interesting is, and I've been really impressed, a former colleague of mine actually, I know is one of the key initiators behind the scheme, that Sainsbury's are really narrowing in on fibre. And fibre is a deficiency for the UK diet. So again, you look at where the UK diet is heading. Well, actually, fibre is a deficiency. The UK diet, as I understand it, is certainly not short of protein, but it's short of fibre. So when you see retailers like Sainsbury's shining a light on fibre, and you see what's happening in the States, you can see where things are moving. But certainly, I think winners in the marketplace have got the ability to scan the horizon and see where changes are coming, and not just do something because they can. That's the thing that I think many marketeers in the past might have been guilty of. They've done stuff because they can, because because the factory needs filling, or because the ops director wants to do it, or the sales director is chasing some volume. It's doing what the right thing is.
Yeah.
And that's where incrementality comes back into the picture, because it's one of those things that should have right at the heart of it a really strong insight.
It will, it will fill the factory in the short term, but then somebody else will outbid you on that production opportunity or whatever. So you say incrementality is the long-term sustainable.
It has to be, and I think it's really exciting. And I think those that embrace incrementality are going to be the winners in the market, and those that do more of the same are inevitably going to be under pressure.
Absolutely. I was very lucky 2 or 3 weeks ago to attend a lecture around GLP-1s, and the fact that it's, I understand, 3 figures per month for a user today in the UK. In the Far East, it's kind of double digits, and it's going down to single digits. The landscape 8 to 10 years from now in terms of affordability, accessibility for people is quite a scary proposition.
It is. It's changing, and it's changing fast, and everything's changing fast, of course, isn't it? I think you look at the way that technology is changing, the way the world is changing, and therefore it's super important, I think, that at any given time the radars of FMCG brands are always scanning to see what's going on. And good businesses are, clearly, because you can see how that's being executed against in market
through acquisition as much as launching.
Absolutely. But I also have a view that I think that's relevant, which is marketeers can rush to new very quickly, and new absolutely has its place. However, I think often businesses can own brilliant propositions, brilliant IP that they can revive. And so before people rush for new, sometimes if you're in a bigger organization, I would encourage those to look back in on what they may have done in the past, what they've got, what flavors they've got, what products they've got.
Absolutely.
There is a whole raft of brilliant IP sat around UK brands that I think is sometimes overlooked. And I have a real passion for revival as a space, because I think it's a space that is sometimes overlooked because there's that rush for something new or rush to do something different. And so I would always encourage brands, particularly when they're looking at where their plans are heading, to just make sure that before they rush to do something brand new, they've checked the back catalogue.
What's in the locker? Yeah, absolutely. You sit there, you could say there's no such thing as a new idea. There absolutely is in the fast moving world, but there's some great ideas that have maybe past their relevance, but could become relevant again in the not too distant future. So
I think so. The other thing is that there's often some familiarity, and in a world of uncertainty, of which we've certainly been in the last few years, people will often retrench to those things that they know and love that feel a bit safer.
The comforts,
past. Comfort food, and,
absolutely.
And I really like it when you sometimes see brands from yesteryear being kind of re-explored or reimagined, because they feel like they've got a chance.
Sometimes, though, when you do buy those brands and you realise that maybe some of the colourings that were there when you were a kid or some of the preservatives have gone, they're not quite the same. I won't name the brand, but there was one recently where, as a slightly nostalgic treat, I bought into it, and my kids were astonished that it wasn't as great as I told them it was going to be.
No, I think memory can often be can sort of paint things in a rosy picture.
Absolutely. Actually, they tease me a lot for my nostalgia, but that's another story for another time. We talked about mentors. We talked about development plans. Clearly, Expo West and seeing what's going on is important. I know you're an avid reader and very keen on what's going on. So how else do you keep yourself in touch with what's going on?
For me, it's a lot of networking. So actually, I'm very lucky to have a great network, and I have a range of friends, colleagues, people that I've connected with over the years who are very generous with time. And so not only do I drink a lot of tea, I drink a lot of coffee. And so quite often I find myself out and about talking to people, because I think, again, conversation is a great unlocker of insight. So a lot of that makes me sort of feel like I'm maintaining relevance. I try and get out to trade shows in the UK and Europe as well. You're right, absolutely, lots of reading, but also spending time in store. So I think one of the most overlooked bits of insight that any marketeer can have is get out to store. 100%. Spend time walking the aisles, listening to those conversations. I remember there being a great example from a sales director at Cereal Partners.
I know where you're going with this one.
And he'd been out in store and he brought back a shopping list that that he'd found on the floor. And this shopping list was probably of a person who was of a certain age, because the writing indicated it was a more elderly person. And they had bought all the things they wanted and scrubbed them through. But shredded wheat didn't have a line through it. And the reason shredded wheat hadn't got a line through it was because for whatever reason, we hadn't been able to supply at that particular time. And those lost sales are really insightful. So it's those little pieces of information that are always available just by listening a lot.
Absolutely.
And so I think for me, Ant, it's about the really important insight that lives and breathes in store. Any marketeer that isn't in store every week really needs to start getting out.
Even better if they can go cross-functionally.
I agree entirely. I think that the best stores that I've ever walked are those where I walk them with colleagues from different functions, and you walk in each other's shoes. And I have been very lucky to do that a lot with people who I really value their opinion, and you see different things. But it's a two-way exchange of knowledge.
Yeah. And even better, it could require a long drive on a Friday, but meeting your buyer or your category director in store. Sure. We've actually had one of my former category directors that I work with on this podcast, and our time together on a Friday, the bacon sandwich and the coffee was always great, and it was great to catch up socially. But that time spent in store, just walking every aisle, not the aisles specifically that you're working on, just walking every aisle and comparing notes on what's going on, the logic that might be behind it, what's working and not working. You know, people don't like PowerPoint as much as we use it as a crutch, to your point. People like getting out to store and seeing what's going on in the real world. So, probably I think you'd share that advice of get out into store with as many different people as you can, and just have your ears open.
I think so. You're absolutely on the money. I also think the piece that is drive to places that you might not normally go to. It's very easy to evaluate what's going on in Tesco, Welwyn Garden City, because Tesco, Welwyn Garden City will always look
pretty good,
because it's really important for the folk there. Get yourself out to a store where it's more regional based, or get to a place where it's probably less core for them. And I think you get to hear things you wouldn't naturally hear. I again have I remember a really interesting story of an MD of a previous life said, I don't care what 6 people in a room in St Albans say. He said, I do. But they're saying it because you're asking them it. Yeah. What you need to go and see is what they're doing. Yeah, that
say-do gap, as people
100%. And I really advocate that ability for people to get out into store, but not the usual suspect store. Go and look in some different places and go and look at, because of course geographically in the UK you'll find relative strengths to different retailers as well. So I'm a big believer that the real insight lives and breathes well beyond what you see on a deck or what you see within an office. Yeah, it's those conversations, it's those magic moments, it's the things that will change behaviour.
Walk a city centre as well. Without the kids, it tends to help you to pick up more things. But I know a couple of projects I've worked on recently that have required. The hypothesis was that grocery and convenience had been maxed out by this particular brand. They wanted to push into food service. And I kind of had a hunch and a theory that the data would also tell me some stories about what the opportunity was in grocery and convenience, but also really getting out to store and seeing, is there a real relevance for this particular category in food service? Yeah. And walking a relatively tight city centre, which is York City Centre, and just really seeing what's going on across leisure, on-trade, universities, retail. Yeah, fantastic.
I think you're right. I mean, having worked in hospitality, which is more pure play than retail, that was a really key learning curve for me. And again, to have permission to go and sit at bars and listen to conversation and talk to bar staff, there's a different play actually in the world of hospitality, which is so much of the guardianship of behaviour can sit with the bar staff. So influencing those individuals for good, or hearing what they're hearing from people across the bar and it's a slightly more interactive purchase than that slightly cold retail purchase, and you can learn a lot by bringing the two together. So I think that there's a real key piece about who's the shopper and who's the consumer as well. Sometimes that's overlooked. There can be this obsession that the consumer is the shopper. They're not always. So putting interventions in place which help you learn what shoppers are doing on behalf of consumers
Absolutely.
is a really big insight.
Yeah. Many categories I can think of. Pet food.
Yeah.
Baby.
Yeah.
Beer.
Yeah,
beer's wines
one.
and spirits. People often
Yeah.
buying for their partner or buying
Exactly.
for somebody else. So yeah, lots of categories. Think shopper and consumer.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that probably brings us up to the present day, Phil. And thank you very much for the mugs. It's always good to have a branded mug to remember to give you a call. Talk to us about See Round Corners and what you're doing today.
See Round Corners was the next chapter for me. I realised I'd gone as far as I could in the world of tea with the role that I had. I had some family changes that necessitated me to come back to being independent. I have to say I loved my independent world. I think had it not been for COVID, it probably would have carried on anyway. So I decided that there was a need for me to come back to market with something that felt relevant. And of course, marketing the marketeer is always the challenge, Jan. What do you do? That's the bit that makes me feel desperately uncomfortable. Anything or anyone else, I feel absolutely secure. So I sort of had this weird out of body experience, and I decided that there was a space I wanted to head towards, which was helping businesses that had brand blind spots to all intents and purposes. And for me, See Round Corners was a really nice iteration of how I can help. I really like the idea that lived experience is a big part of what can be done on behalf of brands. And so I decided about a year or so ago to pursue a new direction. I have a trusted designer who's done a brilliant job of making my brand look lovely. And these mugs are limited edition, and you're very lucky to.
I have two at home.
Yeah, you're very lucky.
Yeah.
So I'll be taking these two away.
That's your quota.
No, certainly am. But no, I think the piece for me was there is a opportunity to bring lived experience in multiple categories, and you can step in and help. And I sort of see four areas that I can really help in. All of them with a commercial lens. So as has probably become clear, I operate at the commercial end of brand marketing because fundamentally you've got to deliver the impact that the business requires. So I've been talking about three things. I can help brands with brand creation. I can help brands with brand acceleration. And also I can help brands with brand revival. And I have been fortunate to work on plenty of brand revival projects throughout my career, Shredded Wheat, British Beef, tea brands, etc. So I love revival. Acceleration is an area where a lot of brands want to focus. So I find a lot of conversations are really hyper-focused on the world of acceleration. How can we make the boat go faster? There's also the brand creation space. And there's a fourth pillar, which sort of sits underneath it all, which is around mentoring. I have been incredibly lucky to have some wonderful mentors that have been in my life, continue to be in my life, and people that I trust. But I've also been fortunate to mentor individuals and spend time helping guide people. And I think when you work independently, it is wonderful because you're independent. But the flip is you lose the ability to perhaps have that team around you that you've enjoyed. And I've always enjoyed leading teams. I've had big teams, small teams, medium-sized teams throughout my career. But the bit that misses when you work independently is that space around having a team. So mentorship's a really nice way.
Seeing people flourish.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love the fact that I've worked with people who are, and I've mentored who are just doing incredible things and are not only fulfilling their potential, but exceeding their potential and doing some wonderful things around the world. I mean, it's one of the lovely things about working for global businesses. You get to work with some great people. So I decided to narrow in on See Round Corners. I really decided that this was my space. I mean, I think good brands focus. So having given it some thought, I kind of re-emerged into the market last year, and I've really loved what I am doing. It's allowing me to have conversations and projects with people who can see the value. And I think the brand blind spot thing's quite interesting. If I reflect on my career, there are times in my career where we had a blind spot. It's like, actually, we're not sure how to get out of that. And I think sometimes a third party pair of eyes can come and join the conversation, get inside the organization and say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It's a real pleasure. And I've been really lucky to spend some time over the last 12 months working with some incredible brands doing some wonderful work, but best of all, seeing performance flourish, both in terms of the brands, but also the individuals.
Yeah,
so I love it. And I think it's one of those things, the variety that I get is the thing that really kind of gets me kind of motivated. And I really do think that you get to meet some fascinating people on the way. And as you know, you and I were unknown to each other 12 months ago.
Yeah.
And through mutual contacts, we've got to know each other. And what it seems to unlock is this wonderful network that, as you said earlier on, exists in food and drink.
Yeah.
FMCG is a relatively small world here in the UK. And
people are incredibly generous. I've said this 2 or 3 times on the podcast. People that you thought would be really up for a coffee and a chat and collaboration, sometimes not. It's been quite a loud explosion in the building, if anyone heard that. But fundamentally, the number of people that you say, hey, I'll come to you, can you spare me 45 minutes for a coffee, is incredible. So people's generosity is unparalleled. I assume it goes on in other industries, but I've been blown away in the last 3 years with people's generosity.
You're absolutely right. I love the fact. And if I made a list of people when I first went independent and the second time, people that you think, oh, they're going to help. And some do, but not everyone. And it's sometimes those unexpected people who create the catalyst for conversation, and you find yourself talking to people you'd never expected. And you're like, wow, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And it's lovely. I mean, I'm very lucky. I've had some people who are very supportive of me. And I was reflecting on sort of how I've often got my business independently. And quite often my way in has been through sales contacts that I've worked with. It might be people I've worked with directly or indirectly or as a recommendation. And I think maybe it's because my own marketing preference is at the commercial end of effectiveness and delivery.
It's testimony to the fact that you have got that commercial emphasis.
Yeah. And I like that, because often it negates the need for the hard sell, because people will go, well, actually, I know that Phil can come and help.
Yeah.
And that's great, because as I said, the sort of the jazz hands bits of doing this for me is the bit that I find probably the most uncomfortable. The other thing it allows me to do is to work with people that I really like. And so I've got a really trusted network of brilliant people who I know I can call upon if I've got an insight element or a category part, or I've got somebody who needs to help me with some design thinking. It's a really lovely space to be, that you can get to choose to work with people who you really respect and who you think are incredible at what they do.
And I hadn't articulated it as brand acceleration in my own head, but when you and I think were both, I was 2 years in, you would sort of just come back into the fold of consultancy, talking to that shared friend and acquaintance of ours, and I said, there is a clearly very big opportunity in terms of where value is being lost through all of those functions. I really want to find and work with a great marketeer that can help demonstrate to our clients where the value is lost and how we can help to grab back as much of that value as possible. And clearly that person put us in touch. But what I'm really excited about is that ability to talk customer development, talk categories, talk RGM, but make sure that we're talking about marketing and marketing spend in the same sentences so that we can demonstrate an end-to-end solution. So that's where it's exciting, I think, for Sellex and for See Round Corners over the next however many years.
I think it's really exciting. I think, like you and I, we've both run P&Ls. So you have a top-down view that I think is really perceptive. And I think as you move along in this journey, you want to be doing things with people who understand the challenges you face. And clearly we are of a similar ilk in terms of our own background, although it's only been recently that we've sort of got to know each other. But I think it is those kind of shared values that I think are really exciting about what you've been doing with Sellex and the broader Sellex offer, and I see is the value I can add from See Round Corners. And I really, I find it exciting that there are gaps, right? Truthfully, there are gaps, because joined up thinking is not as obvious a solution in organizations as it might be. There's too many fiefdoms. There's too many fiefdoms in marketing or sales or category or whatever. And yet I have seen the best examples of where everyone is on the same page, where they are pulling in the same direction. There's an aligned vision, there's an aligned segmentation, there's an aligned delivery against it. And then when you begin to do those things, it feels like fun. Right? It should be fun, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes it doesn't.
No one can enjoy that sort of tension or ambiguity between sales and marketing. No one can enjoy it, but people seem to be more accepting of it than they should be.
Yeah, and it sort of disappoints me, and often I think marketeers can be to blame. I'm not.
Well, see, I can also think, as an originally a sales guy, I think it's it's 50-50, but
but I think that, and this is where it comes back to sort of thinking broader. I think when you put yourself in others' shoes, and that's a really important initiative. I know when I was at CP, we would do workshops whereby we would sort of do walk-in shoes. And so I remember creating one where the sales team came and spent the day briefing our advertising agency and sort of working with them. Equally, I remember doing days where we would walk in the shoes with the sales team, looking at JBPs and all the challenges that the team were facing with their commercial negotiations, maybe around CPI or whatever they were heading towards. And I think when you begin to appreciate each other's world and you can see common ground, you can make good progress. But yeah, tension I think is never a good thing. And fiefdoms disappoint me. They really do. I think you have to get to a place where you're all pulling in the same direction. Otherwise, sort of the magic goes a little bit. And this should be fun, right? You know, I love the fact that it doesn't matter where I am, or if I'm talking to mates and they say, well, what are you working on at the moment? And I tell them this, or I tell them that, or, you know, they were certainly pleased when I was working in beer. There's always, everyone's got a point of view because everyone is a consumer.
Absolutely.
Everyone's a consumer and everyone's got a point of view. And everyone has a really valid point of view. I sort of will digress slightly, but when I joined the world of beer, as I said, there were some challenges in terms of not really solid plans, not solid strategy. And what we realized was there was an innovation pipeline waiting to be built. We had this really good brewery, but no one had spent time with the people who know it best, who are the ops guys, right?
Yeah.
So I went and worked a set of night shifts with our ops team, and they came up with 2 or 3 innovation ideas that were in plain sight, but you'd never see.
Yeah.
And I think what you have to do in these situations is change the landscape and show a bit that you're prepared to think differently. So whenever I've briefed agencies, I try and do it differently. You know, hence the outturn of things like Knitted by Nanas, or when I was working on Bombardier Beer and we would brief in pubs. It's those sort of things that are really exciting. Equally, when you're looking for cost savings, spend some time with the people that really understand the P&L. And that is about collective ownership of the P&L and all being on the same page. And that's the bit that I think is most exciting about what you're building with Selex, which is this chance to offer bespoke solutions, I think, but for challenges that won't feel completely unique because we've probably all encountered them from some lived experience along the way.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we very publicly and very openly work with retailers and we work with manufacturers, that was a very clear choice that we made 3 years ago when we took the business over. That gives us some great perspective. So we were with a client 2 weeks ago where, unfortunately, the marketing director couldn't make it to the meeting, but we spent time with shopper, category, and customer development, and the former category director that we brought along to talk to them about the brand and the future of the brand, the provocation and the challenge, albeit delivered in a lovely way, you could kind of see them shuffling and being a bit uncomfortable with that. So the decision we've made is, it was unfortunate we couldn't do it first time, and we're going to do it again because ultimately, let's really help the marketing team understand the psyche of the buyer, and no better way to do that than in a safe environment as a laboratory before you then go out and really do a big sell with a category director. I think
that's absolutely the way to handle it, and quite often I think the best work. As a marketeer, I can feel it. So when I was first presented Knitted by Nanas, I knew it was good, but also should make you feel a tiny bit uncomfy. We used to have a design agency, or design agencies I worked with over the years, and they would present work that delivered against the brief, but it was always the work that made you feel a tiny bit uncomfortable. Now, you want to be good uncomfortable, not uncomfortable that
it's got to be on the edge to stand out.
Exactly. And if I go back to what I said right at the start, I think for me that's hugely important in the world of marketing, and making sure things don't become too beige, is that you've got to cut through. You've got to be noticed, right? And you've got to persuade people to do something. You've got to persuade people to spend hard-earned money on something over something else, probably, because the nature of their wallet means that every pound is challenged.
But by nature of the fact that it's gone through the commercial process is probably margin additive, probably premium price point. So every time you're encouraging people in a challenged environment to spend a bit more to get a bit more.
And in a world of incrementality, that's going to happen more and more. It has to, because P&Ls don't work with dilution. They just don't. No one's very happy with that. So I think there is definitely a space whereby a bit of discomfort is a good thing. And I'm all for it. You know, gentle provoking of conversation, I think, is something that really can deliver some different thinking. And thinking that is not just about now. I sort of think in a world of marketing, we've become obsessed with the execution and the here and now, because everyone can be communicating all of the time through lots of media. But if I go back to my dear whole principles that I had ingrained in me at the start, you know, what's the insight? What's the strategy? You can never, as an old boss once, you can never execute your way out of a bad strategy.
Absolutely.
You've got to have a great strategy. And great strategies are things that take time to build, but when executed well and executed consistently. But I do think the marketing community can quite often, it's quite magpie-like. It follows where the noise is going, and sometimes for good reason. Okay, I've no issue with it, but quite often it's in a very executional way. And I passionately believe that the best thinking will always come back to the rigor of a really solid strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 questions we always kind of finish on. Best piece of advice to a 21-year-old Phil coming into marketing, having had that slight stint in IT marketing. Best piece of advice. And then finally, what's on your development plan to build your commercial confidence over the next 12 months?
The best piece of advice is to listen. Has to be to listen. I remember going to 21-year-old Phil going to watch focus groups, and I was in a back room watching these focus groups as that were the thing back in the day. And I said something, I was talking, and my boss at the time just went, shush. He said, don't listen to you, I want to listen to what they're saying. That's what matters. And I think that's on the money, because it doesn't really matter what you think as an individual. What really matters is what's the end user, the shopper, the consumer doing. So I try and listen a lot more, and I've always built that into, and often I've worked with people for whom it's not always the loudest person in the room. It's the people that say the most perceptive things. I've worked with some incredible people who probably might say 80% fewer words than many others. Those words they say are absolute gold dust.
An undervalued value.
Yeah, I think so.
Making sure that you seek the person who's looking very thoughtful, but maybe hasn't come out and said it yet. Yeah. What's coming from them? Yeah.
We at various points in my career, I've used a lot of sort of colour wheel, Myers-Briggs. Yeah. I love that because you really get to understand the dynamics of what might engage you or what might annoy you, or et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a really important part of understanding how you operate as a team. So for me, listening, but realising that the best answers come from anywhere as well. So back to my idea about, or my concept of the unlocked innovation for world of beer. It was the team that were working on night shift who were never ever asked. I mean, they basically fell off their sort of seats during their lunch break at 1 a.m. going,
what's he doing here?
No one's ever asked us.
No, but you being there at 1 o'clock in the morning,
exactly,
probably gave them permission to share some of those opportunities, ideas that no one else was listening to at the time.
And ultimately, we're in an ideas business. Okay, so I'm of the view that marketing, in reality, you're just a temporary guardian. That's that. You're only a temporary guardian for as long as you're doing what you're doing, but you want to leave something in a better place than you found it. And I really kind of sign up to that as something that we all get a bit sort of consumed by stuff we don't need to. And I think actually just recognise our role in the world that we play. Yeah, absolutely. And finally, what's on the development plan? What's the focus? Keeping on listening, I would say, actually, interestingly, looking and listening. So I continue to really want to understand how the world is changing. and the world is changing fast. We talked about GLP-1 and how that's going to affect. Clearly, we've got, as long as we've got into this, without saying the letters AI, obviously AI is...
I'm really pleased we've gone that far, but it's important.
But it's really important we talk to it. I think AI is changing many things, often for good, but not always for good. But technology as an enabler, and I think this is the key thing, technology as an enabler is a force for good. And so there are things now that you can have at your fingertips that you probably couldn't in the past. And that's really helpful. But it doesn't beat the importance of getting out, listening to people, going to stores, watching how people make things. We used to do some accompanied shops when I was in my early career, and then we used to do a company breakfast when I was in. It's going and watching and listening. Yeah. So for me, everything I'm doing is all about self-development, about how I can be better at helping people that I work with. And if I go back and be a bit cliched, we all have our own blind spots, and I want to make sure my blind spots are mitigated as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And that's about self-development. And it's one of the joys that I have as part of working independently, that to all intents and purposes, I can deploy my time as best I see fit, and hopefully I do it for the people I work with. But at a personal level, if I can give the best version of myself, then they get the best work out of me.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for making the time, Phil. It's been brilliant to see you. And I know we're going to talk a lot in the near future.
Great stuff. Thanks
a lot. Cheers.